The world of the 1930s was a fragile place. Economies were collapsing, empires were trembling, and nations were rising with dangerous dreams. But no one knew that humanity was slowly walking toward the deadliest conflict in human history. This is the story of World War II, how it rose, how it raged, and how it burned the world before finally fading into silence. After the First World War, Germany was broken, humiliated, and desperate. The Treaty of Versailles had left the nation economically shattered and psychologically wounded. In this darkness, one man rose promising glory: Adolf Hitler, the leader of the Nazi Party. His powerful speeches, extreme ideology, and promise to restore German pride made him a national hero, but beneath the surface, his vision held a terrifying secret. By the late 1930s, Hitler had built one of the strongest armies in the world. His dream was simple: conquer Europe and reshape humanity according to his beliefs. And on September 1, 1939, that dream ignited a global fire when Germany invaded Poland, shocking the world. Britain and France immediately declared war. Within days, Europe was split into two massive alliances, the Allied powers and the Axis powers. Nations that once lived in peace were now preparing for a war that would last 6 devastating years. But this was only the beginning. No one, not even the leaders, could imagine how far this war would go. Cities would fall. Empires would collapse. Millions would lose their lives. And humanity would witness horrors unlike anything seen before. World War II had begun, and the world was now trapped inside a storm from which there was no escape. As the echoes of war spread, the world quickly divided into two colossal forces. On one side stood the Allied powers: Britain, France, China, later the United States, and the Soviet Union. On the other side grew the Axis powers: Germany, Italy, and Japan, united by ambition, aggression, and the desire to rule. Hitler's expansion was rapid and unstoppable. Poland fell within weeks. Soon after, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, and the Netherlands collapsed under the German Blitzkrieg lightning war, a fast and brutal military strategy that overwhelmed entire nations in days. Not every country chose a side. Some, like Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland, remained neutral, hoping to survive the global fire untouched. But neutrality was a fragile shield. War had a way of reaching even the untouched. Hitler's closest partners were forming their own plans. Mussolini's Italy sought to rebuild the Roman Empire, while Japan dreamt of dominating Asia and the Pacific. Together, the Axis powers believed they were unstoppable. But beneath the battlefield strategies and political alliances, a darker story was unfolding. Hitler's ideology demanded the creation of a perfect race, and those who didn't fit his vision were targeted in ways humanity had never witnessed before. Soon, the war would leave the front lines and enter the streets, the homes, and the daily lives of millions. Soldiers would fall, but civilians would suffer even more. As 1940 approached, Europe was trembling. Everyone knew the worst was yet to come. And they were right. While German armies fought across Europe, another war was taking place behind closed doors, silent, hidden, and far more horrifying. Adolf Hitler's regime had begun implementing its most brutal plan: the removal of millions of people he believed were unfit to live in his vision of Germany. Jewish families, Romani communities, disabled individuals, political opponents, and countless innocent people were dragged from their homes and transported to concentration camps. At first, these camps were prisons. But soon, they became something far worse. Hitler called his plan the final solution, a cold, calculated mission to erase an entire people. The world would later name it the Holocaust. Inside the camps, life became a daily fight for survival. People were separated from their families, forced into labor, starved, and subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The number of deaths would eventually rise to nearly 6 million Jews, a tragedy that still stands as one of the darkest stains on human history. Yet the outside world had little idea of the full horror. The war was spreading so quickly, and front lines were shifting so fast, that the true nature of the camps remained hidden. Meanwhile, Hitler continued expanding his empire, capturing France and raising the Nazi flag over Paris. As German troops marched triumphantly through Europe, Hitler believed victory was only a matter of time. But even in this darkness, resistance was growing. People were beginning to fight back, from underground movements in France to secret intelligence networks in Britain. The world was preparing for a long, brutal struggle. And the darkness was far from over. In May 1940, German forces launched a massive assault on France. Within weeks, Paris, the city of art, culture, and romance, fell into Nazi hands. Hitler visited the city himself, walking confidently through the empty streets, believing he had conquered the heart of Europe. But even in defeat, the spirit of France refused to break. French resistance fighters secretly sabotaged German operations. In one symbolic moment, they cut the elevator cables of the Eiffel Tower, ensuring that if Hitler wanted to raise his flag at the top, he would have to climb all 1,600 steps by foot. He never did. As German occupation deepened, life became unbearable for the locals. Anyone seen cooperating with German soldiers was marked as a traitor. After liberation, many French women who had relationships with German troops were punished publicly, their heads shaved as a warning to others. Meanwhile, Hitler issued one of his most shocking orders. When Allied forces approached Paris in 1944, he commanded German General Dietrich von Koltitz to destroy the city entirely, its monuments, its history, everything. But the general refused. He surrendered instead, saving Paris from total destruction. He would forever be remembered as the savior of Paris. Paris was just one chapter of a growing war. Germany had powerful armies, advanced weapons, and ruthless ambition. But the Allies had something stronger, the determination to fight for freedom, no matter the cost. The tides of war were beginning to shift. After France fell, Britain stood alone against the Nazi war machine. Hitler expected the British to surrender quickly. Instead, they prepared for the fight of their lives. In 1940, the German Luftwaffe launched an intense bombing campaign known as the Blitz. Night after night, bombs rained down on London, Birmingham, Liverpool, and dozens of cities. The sky glowed red. Buildings collapsed. Thousands died. Yet Britain refused to break. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, gave speeches that echoed across the world. "We shall never surrender." But amidst the destruction, one city remained untouched, Blackpool. Hitler had secretly ordered his commanders not to bomb it. Why? He believed that once he conquered Britain, Blackpool would become his personal holiday resort. Meanwhile, as Britain endured the Blitz, Hitler was forming another plan. He prepared to invade the Soviet Union, a decision that would eventually become one of his greatest mistakes. And across the ocean, another giant was watching closely. The United States, though not yet part of the war, knew that the global storm was inching closer. Far away in the Pacific, Japan was rising, with dreams of its own. While Europe burned, Japan sought domination in the East. Their empire was growing rapidly, and soon, their ambitions collided with the interests of the United States. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, striking American battleships and aircrafts in a devastating blow. The world changed overnight. The next day, the United States declared war on Japan. Hitler responded by declaring war on America. The global conflict was now truly worldwide. Among the American pilots fighting in the Pacific was a young man named George H.W. Bush, who would one day become the President of the United States. His aircraft was shot down over the ocean. He survived, but several of his crew members were captured, tortured, and brutally killed by Japanese forces. It was one of the most horrific war crimes of the Pacific Front. Japan seemed unstoppable, but the United States began pushing back. Battles across the Pacific Islands were fierce, with soldiers fighting in jungles, caves, and rough seas. And in the middle of all this destruction, one man was about to make history in a way no one expected. The only person to survive both atomic bombings. But that story comes later. For now, the world was preparing for the final and bloodiest chapters of the war. By 1943, the momentum of the war was shifting. The Allies were gaining strength. Germany was facing resistance in every direction, and Hitler's once invincible army was beginning to crumble. The turning point came on the Eastern Front. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in 1941 expecting a quick victory. Instead, he met one of the harshest winters in history and the full fury of the Red Army. Battles like Stalingrad became legends, cities turned into graveyards, soldiers fighting street by street, refusing to give up. After months of brutal conflict, the Soviet Union pushed Germany back. It was the beginning of the end for Hitler. In North Africa, Allied forces defeated Germany's desert armies. In Italy, Mussolini's government collapsed, and the Allies marched forward. Piece by piece, Hitler's empire was falling apart. But as Germany weakened, the cruelty inside the concentration camps intensified. The Nazis tried desperately to hide their crimes, destroying evidence and forcing prisoners on death marches. However, the truth could not be hidden forever. The Allies were closing in on Germany from all sides. The world was now heading toward the final clash, a battle that would decide the fate of millions. By early 1945, German cities were in ruins. Allied bombers had shattered factories, railways, and military bases. Soviet forces were pushing from the east, American and British armies from the west. Berlin, the heart of the Nazi Empire, was surrounded. Inside his bunker, deep beneath the city, Adolf Hitler faced the reality he had refused to accept. His armies were defeated, his allies were collapsing, and the Soviet troops were just blocks away. On April 30, 1945, Hitler chose his fate. He took his own life in the bunker, ending the rule of a man who had brought the world to destruction. A week later, Germany officially surrendered. In Europe, World War II was finally over. But the war itself was not finished. Across the world, in the Pacific, Japan continued to fight fiercely. The United States had to make a decision, one that would change the course of history forever. The battle against Japan was brutal. Every island required massive effort to capture, and Japanese forces refused to surrender. American leaders feared that a full invasion of Japan would cost millions of lives. So they made the most devastating decision in human history. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. In a single flash of light, the city was destroyed. Tens of thousands died instantly. Buildings disappeared. Shadows were burned onto walls. Among the survivors was a man named Tsutomu Yamaguchi, who had come to Hiroshima for work. He was thrown into the air, burned, and injured, but somehow survived. The world was witnessing power beyond imagination, and Japan still did not surrender. What happened next shocked the world even more. 2 days after Hiroshima, Tsutomu Yamaguchi returned home to Nagasaki, not knowing that he was about to witness the second atomic explosion ever used in war. On August 9, 1945, the United States dropped another bomb, this time on Nagasaki. The explosion was even more powerful, flattening the city and killing tens of thousands. Yamaguchi survived again. He became the only recorded human to live through both atomic bombings. Japan was now broken, its cities destroyed, its people suffering, and its resources gone. 3 days later, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan, adding more pressure. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. World War II, the deadliest conflict in history, had finally ended. But the consequences were only beginning. When the smoke cleared, the world looked nothing like before. Entire cities were in ruins. Families were shattered. Economies were destroyed. Over 50 to 70 million people were dead, more than half of them civilians. Europe, once the center of global power, was devastated. Two new superpowers emerged: the United States and the Soviet Union. Their rivalry ignited a new type of conflict, the Cold War, a silent battle of ideologies, technology, and nuclear weapons. Though no direct war occurred between them, their competition reshaped global politics for decades. Meanwhile, the horrors of the Holocaust came to light. Liberation revealed mass graves, gas chambers, and the unimaginable suffering of millions. The world promised that such evil would never be allowed to rise again. The war ended, but its scars would last for generations. War II remains the most destructive conflict humanity has ever seen. It reshaped borders, destroyed empires, created new nations, and changed the course of history. But the true legacy of the war lies not in maps or politics, it lies in the stories of the people. The soldiers who fought. The civilians who suffered. The heroes who resisted. the victims whose voices still echo through time. The war taught humanity a painful lesson. There is no victory in war, only loss. More than 21 million Russians died. Millions of Germans, Americans, British, Japanese, Chinese, and countless others lost their lives. Entire cities vanished. Cultures disappeared. Families were erased forever. Yet from this destruction came hope. The United Nations was formed to prevent future wars. Nations rebuilt themselves from ashes. And the world decided to pursue peace, no matter how difficult. As Einstein said, "I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought. But World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." His warning still stands today. World War II ended in 1945. But its story continues to remind us of the price of hatred, the cost of ambition, and the unbreakable strength of humanity.